I came back from the feed store with a sack of corn under one arm and a thermos of coffee in the other, only to find a neon orange sticker slapped across the windshield of my tractor like a parking ticket from hell. It read, "Towing scheduled in 24 hours for noncompliance." The only problem was, this tractor was parked in the middle of my own dang farm. And I don't live in a subdivision. I live on a 47-acre plot of agricultural land 5 miles from the nearest stop sign. That was the moment I realized something was off, and something was about to blow up bigger than a field fire in July. At first, I just stood there blinking at the sticker like my eyes had betrayed me. I set the sack of corn down real slow, trying to process what I was looking at. My John Deere wasn't blocking a road, or sitting on HOA property. It was parked next to the barn, same place it's been for the past 10 years. There wasn't another house in sight, except the cows, who looked at me like I was the crazy one. Then I heard tires crunching gravel behind me. I turned to see a white SUV with a magnetic sign that read, "Neighborhood Compliance Patrol," rolling up my private drive like it had a legal reason to be there. 3 people in matching polos stepped out, clipboards in hand, squinting like they just walked into enemy territory. I walked over and said, in the calmest voice I could muster, "You folks must be lost." The oldest one, a red-faced man with a sweaty upper lip, replied, "Actually, sir, we're here on behalf of the Green Pines HOA. We've received multiple complaints about unregistered farming equipment being stored on an HOA-managed lot." I stared at him for a second, then burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. Green Pines is a gated development a mile down the road, and the last time I checked, their HOA stopped at the fence line. I gestured behind me and said, "This isn't an HOA lot. This is my farm. Zoned agricultural since 1942. You're standing on land where cows outnumber people 5 to 1. The woman next to him flipped her clipboard and said, "According to our updated district expansion map, this parcel now falls under our jurisdiction." She pointed to a color-coded document like, that settled everything. I didn't know whether to laugh again or call the sheriff. "District expansion," I repeated. "Without my consent? Without county notice? Without so much as a knock on my door?" They nodded like they were performing a sacred duty. I asked them real careful to get off my property before I brought out my attorney or my bull, whichever showed up first. By the time they got in their SUV and drove off, I was already calling the zoning office. While the phone rang, I walked around the tractor, taking pictures of the sticker. I had a bad feeling this wasn't just a mix-up. When the zoning clerk answered, she confirmed what I already knew. My property was still zoned agricultural. No HOA claim. No pending reclassification. No map changes. I thanked her and hung up, but the pit in my stomach stayed. This wasn't about maps. This was about power. That evening, I talked to my neighbor Joe, who owns the goat farm down the road. He said he'd seen the same white SUV parked on his land a few days ago. They didn't confront him, but left a flyer about noise ordinances and fencing restrictions. Joe laughed it off, until his fence got a mysterious citation taped to it. He figured it was a prank. Now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I stopped by the county recorder's office. The lady behind the desk recognized me and raised an eyebrow when I said I needed the zoning map. I showed her the flyer and the sticker photo. Her face changed. "That HOA's been trying to push its limits lately," she said. "They keep filing zoning expansions and nuisance complaints, hoping no one checks the paperwork. Most people just give in to avoid a fight. But not you." I smiled. "No, not me." I spent the next hour pulling every record I could find. My farm hadn't changed zones since the Roosevelt administration. I printed copies of every document I could get my hands on, then drove home and posted a laminated sign on my front gate. Agricultural property, no trespassing, no HOA access. But it wasn't over. That evening, I saw them again. Same white SUV. Same 3 clipboards. This time, they parked right at the edge of my drive and took pictures of my barn. I didn't say a word. I just waved and smiled while holding my phone up to record. One of them noticed and quickly ushered the others back into the vehicle. As they pulled away, I caught a glimpse of a new sticker in the glove box. Bright red this time. The deputy read the papers over slowly, then looked up and said flatly, "This map isn't legal. It has no county seal, no zoning stamps, and no authorization. This land isn't within your HOA jurisdiction. You folks are trespassing." The man with the earpiece opened his mouth to argue, but the deputy held up a hand. "Unless you have a signed court order or legal documentation approved by the zoning commission, you've got no authority here. Now, I suggest you all get back in your vehicle and leave before I decide to write you up for harassment." The woman with the clipboard sputtered something about filing a formal complaint. The deputy turned to her and said, "You're welcome to do that. From your own property." The tow truck driver backed away slowly and nodded toward me. "Sorry, sir. I'm just here on a work order. I didn't know the situation." I nodded back and said, "No hard feelings. But next time, ask a few more questions before you let someone send you onto private land." The HOA crew climbed back into their SUV, but not before one of them gave me a long, narrow-eyed stare, like this wasn't over. I stared right back. They drove off in a cloud of dust, the deputy watching until they disappeared past the trees. He turned back to me and asked if I needed anything else. "Just making sure it's on record," I said. "I've got footage, photos, paperwork, and now a witness." He tipped his hat. "Smart. Keep all of it. If they come back, call again. Next time, we might not be so patient." After he left, I sat on the porch a long time, coffee gone cold in my hands. The air was still, but there was a tension that hadn't been there before. This wasn't over. That crew wasn't giving up just because the law told them no once. They were counting on me to fold, to get tired, to let it slide. But that's not how you survive on land like this. Over the next week, I met with neighbors every other evening. We held informal meetings in barns and kitchens, shared documents, timelines, and footage. Joe brought in 2 more property owners who'd found HOA notices on their gates. One of them, an older woman named Mrs. Talbot, had been threatened with a lien on her land over failure to comply with landscaping standards. She lived alone, didn't even own a lawnmower, and had no clue how they got her name. I passed along copies of everything to Sarah, the reporter. She published the story 2 days later under the headline, *HOA overreach sparks rural backlash. Farmers say enough. The article made the rounds fast. Local news, regional blogs, even got picked up by a national farming network. Phones started ringing. More people stepped forward with similar stories. The HOA issued a press release claiming it was all a misunderstanding during a boundary review. No one bought it. 3 days later, I got a certified letter. It was from the Green Pines HOA legal team. It threatened legal action for defamation, trespassing, and interference with enforcement duties. I handed it straight to Robbie, who laughed and said, "Perfect. Now we've got retaliation on paper." He filed a counter notice citing harassment, attempted fraud, and illegal enforcement actions. The sheriff's department opened a case. The county commission scheduled a public hearing. The HOA had poked the wrong beehive. When the day of the hearing came, half the room was filled with farmers, ranchers, and rural homeowners. Joe even wore a clean shirt and brought a slideshow. Sarah sat up front with her camera, and Robbie stood beside me at the mic. We laid it all out. The fake maps, the unauthorized notices, the false claims of jurisdiction, the attempted towing, and the midnight visits. The county commissioner didn't even try to hide his disgust. By the end of the hearing, the HOA had been issued a formal cease and desist on all off-property enforcement actions. Their expansion map was rejected. The sheriff's office announced a new task force to investigate overreach and false claims. And I was asked to join the county's zoning advisory board. I went home that night and sat on the porch as the sun went down, just like I always did. The cows lowed in the distance. The breeze rustled through the cornstalks. And for the first time in weeks, the air felt calm again. My tractor sat next to the barn untouched. The sticker still on the windshield, faded now, but I left it there on purpose. A reminder of the day some outsiders tried to claim something they didn't own, and how the land and the people on it pushed back. Sure, here's your story rewritten with correct punctuation and formatting, preserving the tone and momentum. The passenger's hand trembled. Back inside, I called the sheriff. I explained the situation and asked what my legal rights were. He chuckled and said, "As long as your land is zoned agricultural and you've posted signs, they're trespassing. Next time they step past your gate, give me a call and we'll have a little chat." That night, I didn't sleep much. My phone buzzed just after midnight. A trail cam I'd set up near the back pasture triggered. I opened the footage and saw headlights. Someone was back there, walking along the fence line with a flashlight. They didn't step onto my land, but they were close. Too close. I saved the video and added it to the folder I'd started keeping. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was a targeted campaign. They were trying to push me out one fine at a time. But I'd spent my whole life digging into this land. I wasn't going anywhere. If the HOA wanted a fight over my tractor, they were going to get one. And by the time I was done with them, they'd wish they'd never left their pretty little sidewalk. The morning air was thick with due intention as I climbed into my truck and headed toward the county recorder's office again. I had barely slept after the trail cam footage came through. The idea of strangers wandering near my fence line in the dark had stirred something inside me, something older than pride and sharper than fear. It was the same thing that kept my grandfather plowing this land through droughts and recessions. I wasn't about to let some clipboard warriors with fake authority push me off my own soil. I needed proof. I needed leverage. If they were going to play dirty, I was going to play smarter. At the county building, I waited in line behind a couple arguing about dog permits before finally reaching the clerk's desk. She was the same woman from yesterday, and when she saw me, she gave a knowing smile like she'd half expected I'd be back. I asked to see the full record of zoning boundaries for my plot and anything filed in the last 6 months involving the Green Pines HOA. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a thick manila folder. I opened it slowly, flipping through years of paperwork until I found a set of documents marked as pending. It was a map with a shaky red outline that stretched past Green Pine's original boundaries and into parcels that clearly didn't belong to them, including mine. It had no county seal, no approval signature, and no accompanying zoning change application. My breath caught. This was it. They were filing fake expansion notices without going through legal channels, counting on no one to challenge them. I asked the clerk if this map had been processed. She shook her head. Not only was it invalid, it had been submitted improperly. No public notice, no hearing, no vote, just a quiet little drop in the suggestion box, like they thought the county would rubber stamp it eventually. I asked if I could have a certified copy, and she handed one over, adding that I should keep it somewhere safe and consider contacting legal counsel. I already had someone in mind. I called my cousin Robbie, who worked as a rural property attorney out of state but kept his license valid here. He picked up on the first ring. When I explained what was happening, he didn't sound surprised. He told me this kind of overreach was becoming more common. HOAs were expanding like weeds, trying to snag extra land to boost their dues revenue and property control. He told me to gather all the documents I could, photograph every incident, and start a timeline. If I could prove a pattern of harassment and illegal action, the county might not be the only authority interested. As I left the recorder's office, I got a call from Joe again. His voice was low, like he was whispering. He said someone left a violation notice on his barn gate during the night. It accused him of improper fencing and excessive animal noise, threatening fines of up to $5,000. He asked if they had a right to do that. I told him no and promised to swing by with the documents I'd just picked up. It wasn't just my farm anymore. These people were trying to absorb the entire outer ring of properties around Green Pines. The more I dug, the uglier it got. I stopped by Joe's place before heading home and showed him the zoning proof. His hands were shaking as he looked through it. He wasn't a fighter by nature. He raised goats, made cheese, and played the banjo. He didn't know what to do with bureaucracy and threats. But when I told him he wasn't alone, that I'd stand with him if things escalated, something shifted in his eyes. We made copies of the maps and notices and split them among a few other neighbors. By sunset, 5 of us had agreed to start tracking every HOA visit, photo, or flyer. If they wanted to poke the hornet's nest, we were going to sting back. When I got home, I found another notice stuck to the post of my front gate. This one was even bolder than the last. It claimed my barn violated HOA structure appearance guidelines and demanded I repaint the east side to match Green Pine's neutral color palette. I stood there for a long minute, letting the absurdity sink in. Then I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my groceries. They wanted me to paint my working livestock barn beige. On a farm. In the middle of nowhere. I didn't touch the notice. I took pictures, added them to my file, and then drove 3 stakes into the ground by my driveway. I attached 3 signs to them. One said, private agricultural land. One said, not subject to HOA authority. The third one just said, beware of bull. I meant the animal, but it worked both ways. The next step was installing better surveillance. I picked up 2 motion cameras from the hardware store and positioned them on opposite ends of the pasture. One covered the road. The other faced the barn. I connected them to a backup battery and made sure the footage uploaded to a cloud account. If they were going to sneak around again, I'd have footage from multiple angles. I also added floodlights with motion sensors. If anyone got too close at night, they'd light up like it was high noon. Later that night, I got a knock on the door. It was Sarah, the local news reporter who occasionally covered zoning disputes and rural issues. She said she'd heard from someone at the recorder's office that a farm had been targeted by HOA expansion. I invited her in and showed her everything I'd gathered. She asked thoughtful questions, took notes, and snapped a few photos of the sticker still stuck to my tractor window. She said she'd been waiting for a story like this to hit her desk and that this was bigger than it looked. She promised to follow up in the morning and left just as the sun was dipping behind the ridge. I stood on my porch as darkness fell, listening to the distant hum of crickets and the occasional lowing of the cows. The land was still, but my gut told me the quiet wouldn't last. The HOA had crossed the line, and now they were trying to clean it up with threats and fake fines. They had no clue what kind of storm they'd stirred up. I had paperwork. I had evidence. I had neighbors rallying together. They thought I was just some farmer too busy with tractors and hay bales to fight back. What they didn't know was that I had spent my whole life fighting for this land, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away without a war. Let me know if you'd like the next part cleaned up too. Certainly. Here's the full story you provided, now with corrected punctuation and without headings. Knowing them, that move was coming soon. The knock on my front door came just after lunch while I was shelling peas on the porch. I looked up, expecting the mailman or maybe Joe, but instead I saw her. The HOA president herself stood there in khaki slacks, a pearl necklace, and that same smug expression she wore in the local paper photo from a fundraiser 2 months back. She didn't flinch when I stood up and crossed the porch toward her. She held a folder under one arm and what looked like a citation pad in the other. Her mouth moved into a tight smile, like she was doing me a favor by showing up in person. I said nothing at first, just leaned against the porch rail and waited for her to speak. She opened with the usual nonsense, saying she was here to offer me a final opportunity to come into voluntary compliance before things escalated further. I didn't ask what she meant by escalate. I just told her calmly that she was trespassing and had 60 seconds to get off my property, or I'd be calling the sheriff again. Instead of leaving, she stepped forward and waved the citation pad like it held the word of God. She claimed I was now in violation of a newly adopted neighborhood unity policy that governed structure aesthetics, noise control, and property use. I asked her plainly if she was out of her mind. She said she had full legal authority over the expanded area and that my refusal to acknowledge it was a personal grievance against her leadership. I was about to tell her to turn around and walk back to her air-conditioned fantasy world when she said something that stopped me cold. She said she had video footage of unlicensed activity happening on my land. She said the drone captured what looked like large-scale dumping and structural instability near the east pasture. I stared at her hard, heart beating faster, not because I was guilty, but because I realized what she was doing. She was setting up a false narrative to justify legal action, fabricating violations that didn't exist to muddy the waters and intimidate me into submission. I asked to see the footage. She said she'd present it at the next compliance hearing. I told her there wouldn't be one. She said, "We'll see about that," and turned on her heel like she'd won something. I followed her halfway down the path toward her car. When she reached the gate, I said loud enough for her to hear that every second of her visit had been recorded, and I'd be submitting it to my lawyer. She paused just a second before unlocking her door. That pause told me everything. She wasn't bluffing. She was escalating. And now I needed to do the same. The next call I made was to Robbie. I told him everything and asked what our next legal move should be. He said we had more than enough to file for a cease and desist order and possibly a temporary restraining order against her and the entire HOA board. He also told me to consider contacting a real estate fraud investigator. If they were knowingly expanding without legal right and issuing false fines, we could drag them into court on multiple fronts. I liked the sound of that. I liked it a lot. Before hanging up, Robbie told me something that stuck. He said she's betting on fear. Bullies always do. The second you show you're not scared, they lose their grip. That night, I went over every inch of the drone footage. Not just mine, but the ones I'd gathered from other neighbors. I slowed it frame by frame. I looked for anything they might twist. There was nothing illegal, nothing unsafe. Just tractors, fences, cows, and honest work. Still, I knew she'd spin anything to fit her narrative, so I got ahead of her. The following morning, I drove to town and visited the Environmental Review Office. I asked to schedule a voluntary inspection of my property by a third-party county official. The woman behind the desk looked surprised but nodded. She said they'd never had a complaint about my land but would be happy to send someone out. I requested it in writing and left with a signed confirmation in hand. If the HOA tried to claim environmental abuse, I'd already have the county's word clearing me. That same day, I received an email from Sarah. The article had gone viral. A regional news station wanted to send a crew out for a full interview and on-site segment. She asked if I was okay with it. I told her, absolutely. The more eyes on this, the better. Within 48 hours, a camera crew pulled up beside the barn and set up equipment like they were filming a documentary. I gave them the whole story, from the first sticker to the drone to the phony fines. I walked them through every step, every document, every encounter. They captured it all. Right after the interview wrapped, I spotted movement by the cornfield. A familiar tan shirt ducked behind the fence line. I walked over slow, no anger in my steps, just purpose. And there she was again, the HOA president herself, standing in my field, holding what looked like a soil sample bag. I asked if she was lost. She didn't answer at first, then said she was conducting a private investigation. I told her she was now officially trespassing on agricultural land without permission and asked if she preferred I call the sheriff or the press. She froze. I pulled my phone from my pocket and started recording. That did the trick. She started arguing, saying she had reason to believe my soil was leaching into the neighboring properties. She said if I didn't cooperate, she'd file for emergency sanctions. That's when I asked her one final question. Did she know my barn had audio recording installed? Her face changed. I asked again, slower. Did she know she'd just been recorded admitting to trespassing and attempting to collect fabricated evidence? That was the moment she backed away and practically ran back to her vehicle. Back inside, I saved the footage and forwarded it to Robbie. His response came quickly. We've got her. Full trespassing, intent to falsify evidence, potential defamation. He told me to prepare for a court date, but I wasn't just preparing. I was enjoying this. Not because I liked conflict, but because the truth was finally rising like wheat after a hard winter. She came onto my land thinking she could bend it to her will. What she didn't understand was this land wasn't just soil and fences. It was heritage. It was identity. And it was about to hand her the biggest loss of her smug little life. The courtroom smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. I sat in the front row, dressed in clean jeans and a button-up, trying to ignore the row of HOA board members sitting across the aisle. Their leader, the president who had trespassed onto my farm, looked anything but calm. She kept flipping through papers in a messy binder, whispering urgently to the lawyer seated beside her. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but I could already feel the weight of everything that had led to this moment pressing down on the room like a storm cloud about to burst. Robbie stood beside me, calm as ever. He had flown in 2 nights ago and spent every spare minute sorting and labeling the evidence we had gathered, Drone footage, trail cam videos, zoning maps, timestamps, copies of phony fines, screenshots of text messages from other affected neighbors, and most damning of all, the footage of the HOA president sneaking onto my property and admitting she was building a false case. Robbie had said this hearing wouldn't just be about protecting my rights. It could expose the entire HOA's pattern of overreach, harassment, and possible fraud. I wasn't just here for my tractor anymore. I was here for every neighbor they'd threatened into silence. The judge entered, a stern older woman with reading glasses and a slow walk that demanded attention. She took her seat and began the formalities while both attorneys stood. The HOA's lawyer opened with a polished but hollow speech about community standards, the importance of cohesive land use, and the alleged dangers posed by agricultural mismanagement. He talked in circles, dropping words like precedent and uniformity, until even the bailiff looked bored. When it was Robbie's turn, he didn't say much. He simply handed the judge a thick file and said, "Every point of dispute is addressed inside, backed with certified zoning documents, official inspection results, and recorded evidence of misconduct." Then he added that the defendant was never under HOA jurisdiction, and the only violations committed were by the HOA itself. The judge began reading. For several minutes, the courtroom was silent except for the turning of pages. Then she looked up and asked about the drone footage. Robbie nodded and plugged a flash drive into the courtroom's monitor. The screen flickered to life, and there it was for everyone to see. The drone buzzing over my field, the red lights circling the barn, then the night footage of one of their board members retrieving it from my tree line. The judge watched closely, then asked who had authorized the drone use. The HOA lawyer stuttered something about oversight and community safety, but the judge shut him down with one sharp word: unlawful. Then came the audio. My conversation with the president recorded near the cornfield played through the speakers. Her voice, clear and unmistakable, declared she was conducting her own investigation and admitted she had no legal right to be there. When the recording ended, the judge leaned back in her chair and sighed. It wasn't the sound of someone annoyed. It was the sound of someone deeply disappointed by what she had just heard. She turned to the HOA's lawyer and asked if they had anything further. He tried to pivot, claiming the expansion was still under review and that any actions taken were preliminary. The judge cut him off. She stated firmly that no review had been processed, no zoning change submitted through proper legal channels, and no authority granted to the HOA beyond its original boundary. She said the behavior demonstrated in the recordings and documents bordered on intimidation and abuse of power. She paused, then said she would be issuing an injunction against the HOA, forbidding them from contacting me or stepping foot on my property again. She also announced that the county would be reviewing their practices for possible legal violations and recommended that the state audit their financial conduct. The courtroom erupted into a buzz. A few people in the back whispered excitedly. The HOA board sat frozen, faces pale, the president visibly trembling. The judge looked at me then, eyes sharp but kind. She said I had the right to seek damages and that if I wished to pursue a civil case for harassment, trespassing, or defamation, the court would support it. I nodded once and thanked her. I didn't need a big speech. The truth had spoken loud enough. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered like bees around a wildflower. Microphones, cameras, flashing lights. I didn't say much, just told them this was never about rebellion. It was about the right to live in peace without being bullied by people who thought paper authority made them invincible. One of them asked if I planned to sue. I said I hadn't decided yet, but I'd sure be sleeping better knowing I didn't have to watch the skies for drones anymore. Continued. Let me know if you'd like the story to continue from this point. It's lengthy and detailed, so I can break the rest into sections or provide a formatted document.